All right, Matilda, thank you so much for joining me and today and to talk to the followers for the Violet Hour Book Club. We're really excited to be reading your book, The Freezer Door, as our July selection. So I have some questions for you, and hopefully they're smart enough. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about like one of the things that stood out for me when selecting this book for our book club is the great many endorsements the book has from other writers, right? So, and also like how many endorsements call the book like indescribable. And I'm kind of curious, like how do you describe the book to people?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's about desire and its impossibility. And through that lens, it's about maybe the dream of the city as the place where you find everything and everyone that you never imagined, and the way that that possibility has been foreclosed by gentrification, consumerism, and homogenization, and also with either in dominant straight culture or in queer and gay cultures as well. And I think it's also a search for an embodied self. And
Hmm.
so I'm moving through all these worlds, some of which I already know are corrupt, in order to find what isn't. And so it kind of starts with the exploration of, trying to find an embodied self in a world that doesn't allow it.
Hmm. And speaking of like embodied and like the book is kind of fractured also, right? Like in terms of its format, right? The book is a memoir. It's written in fragments, right? Some are very short, some are a bit longer. And I read somewhere too, I'm not sure if this is true, but one of the original drafts was about 1,000 pages. And I'm kind of curious a bit about this approach. Like also, like, can you talk a little bit about like your initial vision for the book? And also, like, how did you decide what to include and what not to include? Because I imagine there must have been a lot that you could have chosen from.
Absolutely. Yes. So the first draft it was something ridiculous, like over 1,000 pages. And I think for me, I was writing without any intent. So it was just like for several years, I just put anything in a document, anything I'd thought of. So it could be like the horrible outfits that were on display in the window of the yoga boutique, or it could be like bad sex in the park, or it could be sudden moments of connection, or going to a gay bar and hating it, or all of these moments of possibility and impossibility. And but I didn't know. Oh, and also just the slow encroachment of gentrification on Capitol Hill, the neighborhood where I live in Seattle, like all of these things at once. And so for me, in writing the book, I had no idea what I was doing. And I was just putting things in that were interesting to me. And I did kind of get a sense of some of those things as I was writing. Um, and that is where the sort of notion of trying to find an embodied self in a world that doesn't allow it. But I didn't know that when I was writing it. I was just like, so for example, there were like probably, I don't know, 100 or 2 experiences of having sex, public sex in the park or something, or like 100 of these bad outfits at the yoga boutique, or just several hundred experiences of gentrification in the world. But I the way I don't want to impose a structure on the writing. I want the structure of the book to come through the writing itself. And so in a way the text is also searching for its own form, and that's another form of embodiment with the text itself to have that embodiment. But I didn't really know what it was until I was invited to do this reading series in Seattle, and it's called The Furnace. And you read for a whole hour anything that's about Seattle. And I was like, uh-oh, this is what I've written about Seattle. So I had to figure out what the hell. Okay. So I knew the part that I thought was the most polished. And it is actually what is now the beginning of the book. But I didn't know that then. That just like pulled out from like a few years into this writing. I just pulled it out, and and it kind of ends with a conversation between an ice cube and an ice cube tray, which is, also, of course, a conversation about embodiment and relationships and failure and impossibility and connection and disaster. And, but that's when and it ends with open the freezer door. And that's when I knew that was the title of, of the book. And so the structure, then I was like, okay, now I understand what I'm doing. And I took all these different parts, like actually sort of, I was like, here's all these parts about dancing. So I put them all together. And then I was like, here are all these parts about sex in the park, or here are all these parts about loss. Um, and and then I figured out which ones for me felt like the ones that sort of encapsulated what I wanted to say, but left it open. Because I always want to leave that openness, right? That open the freezer door, which is about opening up into risk, into devastation, into everything that might fail us, but we have to try anyway, right? So that's kind of how it was structured. And then I pared down, 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 cut, 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 cut. Because now it's a pretty, it's like 200 and something pages, but some of the pages are one sentence,
Yeah.
right? Some of them are a paragraph. And so that's sort of all pared down from this really capacious, I call it the material. It was, rather than like a draft, because it's like, it was so much.
You mentioned, of course, like you live in Seattle, and then you have this opportunity to read at this reading series in Seattle. You also mentioned the ice cubes in the freezer door. You mentioned, I think, at some point about like this thing called the Seattle freeze, right? Which is kind of an interesting thing to think about in regards to the text that you've written. I think sometimes we have a similar thing in Montreal, but can you talk a little bit about like what the Seattle freeze is and how that maybe also kind of informed the book?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's funny because it wasn't even intentional when I thought of the title. But the Seattle freeze is this mentality in Seattle where, you see someone on the street, they're like up ahead, they look really interested. You're like, "Oh my God, this is great." So you walk up and you're like getting ready to say hello and then they like turn over this way. You might even see someone and you're like, "Hey girl." And they're like, or they're like looking at you, but like just kind of like not really registering, just kind of like looking at that plant in the background, behind you. And it's this kind of gated suburban mentality in the urban environment. And people like to claim that it's the alleged Nordic heritage of Seattle. And if you look up how many people are of Nordic heritage, it's some very small percentage. Really, it's about the tech industry and the gentrification of the urban mindset and the ways that people, in many ways, are moving to the city to recreate the like gated mentality of the suburbs rather than move, but with maybe like cooler things like, oh my God, I can go out to that cool bar. I can drive into my like gated parking lot and I'm going to go to that cool bar. Oh my God, I'm going to get smashed. But they don't want to change. To me, the city is about change. It's about how it will change us. Now, as queers, many of us are getting away from like horrible fucking environments, right? We're moving to a place to find other like weirdos and freaks and outsiders and sexual possibility, gender, sexual, social, political self-determination, wildness, and but I think so much, unfortunately, of the city now is about keeping all of that out,
Mm.
ironically, in
Mhm.
any way that actually could allow um, for something to kind of rupture the kind of smooth facade of a kind of like corporate mentality, especially in like very gentrified cities like Seattle. I think it might be less true in places that are less gentrified, um, but more and more everything kind of imitates that.
So as you're saying here, like, much of the book revolves around like the search for community, intimacy, sense of self, embodied self, which totally resonated with me. I think, like me, you came of age in the 1990s, and, there was this sense that coming out was supposed to be liberating, that it would lead to belonging and fulfillment. Yet that didn't materialize. That promise didn't quite materialize for many of us. And can you talk a little bit about that period in your life and why you think that reality fell short of what we might have imagined it to be?
Sure, yeah. I came of age. I moved to San Francisco when I was 19, and I was fleeing childhood and everything I was supposed to be. I thought that I had to like outdo my parents on their own terms. Like I grew up in an upper middle class, Jewish assimilated family, and I was like, I have to go to a better college and do better than them, and then maybe get married and have like a horrible relationship and be really cold, but have a bigger house than them. And then I got there and I was like, get me the fuck out of this. I'm just learning to become them. And so I moved to San Francisco and, left all of that. And I was really searching for like radical outsider queers, direct action activism, vegans, incest survivors, sluts, whores, anarchists, all of us kind of like escaping, abusive families and places where we couldn't be ourselves and trying to create something in the ruins of every day. This is 1991, also, or 92, I think, when I moved to San Francisco. And so it's like the height of the AIDS crisis in the US. And also it felt like everyone was dying, right? And everyone was dying, and of AIDS, of drug addiction, of suicide. But it was also a moment of reinvention, total reinvention, not in a dominant cultural way, but in a subcultural way where we were like, fuck that world. We don't want to be part of any of that, right? So, and I think, of course, that mentality always exists, but it also, I feel like, has become more marginalized, way more marginalized, ironically, than in a moment of absolute catastrophe, right? And so I think the failure is always there, even in the possibility, right? Because in a
Mhm.
lot of ways, that was, and I start the book actually, I say, I remember when faggots kissed hello. And and I remember that was the early 90s when everyone kissed hello because we were saying we are not afraid, right? And no one kisses hello anymore. Like, even if we're talking about before the pandemic is a different, meaning the COVID pandemic. But this book is written before that, right? And so I feel like those gestures of intimacy, especially communally, have in many ways disappeared, but we can always still try to make them, create them. We're always living in a time um, of intense, especially in the US, the dominant colonial power in the world. Like, our lives are predicated on the destruction of the entire world, but we have to create something else anyway. And so the book is really about those very intimate moments, on the very personal, like interpersonal, but also, of course, it draws from those, my formative moments and also these sort of structural failures as well.
You write about how many queer people remain nostalgic also for a past that may never have existed in the way that, they imagined it. I find that too. I've seen that quite a bit as well. And I'm kind of curious, like, where do you think this nostalgia comes from? And can it prevent us from, what can it prevent us from seeing about the present moment?
Yeah, thank you. I'm totally against nostalgia. And I think you're talking about the 90s. There's an intense nostalgia for the 90s, right? And it doesn't,
Even the
it
70s,
prevents.
I have to say too, some people I know too, like of the 70s as well. But yes, sorry, yeah.
Exactly, both
Yeah.
of those.
Yeah.
Yes. And I mean, the 70s, like when I first moved to San Francisco, all these older queens were like, oh my God, girl, you should have experienced the 70s. You're here too late. Oh my God, girl, and it's like, I think people are always romanticizing a golden age that never existed. And if we're always romanticizing something that didn't exist, we can't create it in the present moment. So for me, the opposite of nostalgia is truth. Like all of the messiness, all of the complication, all of the devastation, all of the possibility, it's all at once, right? And I think the nostalgia, it sort of packages everything as this kind of like shiny, glittery, like cute. And it can come across in a lot of different ways. Like some of it, like the 70s nostalgia is often about like, like dirtiness or like nastiness. It's like, girl, just do it. Like you don't have to romanticize something else, like in order to justify it, right? Or it's about freedom, right? Or like, the 90s people romanticize like grunge. Who liked grunge in the 90s? I'm in Seattle now. But like grunge, I mean, come on. Like that's like an embarrassing counterculture. Let's figure out something that actually was like good. So I think that people just repeat this same kind of, and it's, you can see it especially like the fashion industry, right? It's like, and those the 70s is like endlessly, it's like, oh my God, are you gonna bring that back again? But I think it's like, in a way, it's imposing the sort of flatness of something like the fashion industry on our actual lives, right? And so, but our lives aren't flat, they're not flat ends. And I think, we need to really look, and I do believe in looking at the past. I mean, that's crucial. Like, how do we imagine a future if we can't look at the past? But we have to look at it in all of its layers and complications.
So I quite like that quote of yours, like the opposite of nostalgia is truth. And this book is very honest and candid. And I was wondering if you could maybe speak a little bit about what your relationship to truth is in your writing. And how do you know when you've gotten close to it?
Oh, I love that question. So it's funny, when I first started writing, I was writing novels and I was like, um, the difference between fiction and autobiography is that autobiography is all lies. And so that's why I write fiction. And now I'm writing nonfiction, even though there is, of course, a conversation between an ice cube and an ice cube tray that may or may not have happened. I don't know, in the book. But for me, I am really, I feel like what it really is about is embodiment and moving toward like vulnerability in my work. And so for me, like this book is more vulnerable as nonfiction. And that's why, and I am really looking for these moments that formed me, these moments of failure, these moments of possibility. Um, and um, and I think that the truth for me is really in that embodied sense. So let's say take the ice cube and ice cube tray conversation. I think it is true in a certain way. Um, even though I'm not sure that I actually witnessed it, although I have to go check in the freezer after this conversation. Um, but but yeah, so it's like, and I feel like sometimes we can only find it in moments, but it's really about, I think, writing what I'm most afraid of, like what I think that, oh my God, if I say that out loud, like just gonna die. It's gonna be over, and then sometimes I can't even say it, but I can write it. And then I read it, it's in the world, and people are like, they're not even phased. And I'm like, okay. So now I can go on living, right? And so I think it is really moving toward those things that we feel like we can't say so that we can say them, and also can like move through everything that makes us um, fully alive.
So, you don't consider your work to be, I read somewhere that you say that you don't really consider your writing to be activism, although probably many other people would consider your writing to be a piece of activism. What does your writing mean to you then? Like what and why for you, like why is it important for you to write about these topics, for instance?
Yeah, I write in order to stay alive. And I think for me, writing has always been the way that I can like understand the world, that I can express myself, that I can find other people, that connect to all of this, that I can express what isn't really being expressed in the world. And um, yeah, and I think, when I say that it is how I stay alive, I mean, in a way that sounds like a rhetorical gesture, but I also think it's true because it is, like I said, like sometimes there are things that I can't even say, but I just like put them in the writing as if it's just a completely, it's very candid and just like random and, like, oh my God, just throwing this random thing in. But actually, I've been thinking about it for years. Don't tell anyone. But, and I'm like trying to figure out how do I say this, but as if it is just very casual, right? Because everything blends together, and I do think writing more and more for me is how I find connection when other people read my work and can really, because it's all me, it's all there. Like I'm not holding anything back. Sometimes it's even more me than me, and I'm like, whoa, what did I do? What, girl? um, but I think so. I think that's why I write, and um, Yeah, exactly.
It seems to resonate also with a lot of people. Like, many readers, reading through some of the reviews of the book by folks, a lot of people mention that their copies are filled with dog-eared pages and underlined passages, right? And the book also came out around the time of the pandemic where people were also kind of starting to, I mean, you were thinking about this before, but like, I think at the time it landed at a time when a lot of people were thinking about connection, right? Um, so I'm kind of curious, like actually one of the reviewers, Maggie Nelson, called it like a book about not belonging that made me feel deeply less alone, right? Which I think is quite powerful. How have you felt about, I guess, about the response from readers? Because like, one of the, the internet has like a lot of downsides, but I'm sure it has a lot of plus sides too, because you actually do hear from people who maybe have read the book and reached out. How have you felt about kind of the response to the book from the people who've read it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the response has been incredible. And yeah, I mean, it came out in 2020. And so it was during lockdown. So my book tour was all, like this. And I had never done that before. And I remember when the pandemic started, I was like, there's one thing I'm never gonna do, I'm not gonna be on Zoom. Because I'm like, I believe in in-person connection on the street if possible. And and then of course the pandemic happened. I'm having a book tour. It's all on Zoom. And I was like, what the hell is this gonna feel like? This is gonna be weird. But I was like, I could even feel it on Zoom, and I would be like, the events would end and I'd be like, whoa, wait, I'm in my apartment. I'm like, what's going on? And and I think that the fact that the book came out in 2020 did really magnify people's connection with it, especially the themes of like alienation and search for connection. Um, and it landed in a really interesting way because it is a book that refuses all of the conventions of traditional narrative prose. And all the things were told to do in order to get like, mainstream attention or whatever. And strangely, it got mainstream attention and the attention was good. I mean, it was like not good is who cares, but it was like deep. It was like engaged. And so it has been a really interesting experience. And I feel like it continues to be.
Well, I'm gonna leave it there. I'm sure there's like plenty of things that we can continue to talk about, but our book club, Violet Hour Book Club, will be reading The Freezer Door as its selection for the month of July. So if you are in Montreal and you want to unpack a lot of the things that we've talked about today, please feel free to kind of check us out online. Matilda, thank you so much. I hope that the next time we do this, it's in person in Montreal. As I said, you have a lovely invitation to come anytime you'd like. I'd love to talk to you in person.
Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation, and I hope people enjoy the book group. Feel free to be in touch.
Thank you.